So 1998 was my senior year in high school, and my friend Dan and I became close. As a matter of fact, we spent a whole year in study hall together in the library of we were the first graduating class out of the Almond campus. And in that library area, it was me, this guy Dan, this guy Dave Collins, who worked with a youth group at Emmanuel Church, and then my future sister-in-law. So quite the crew there. And this guy Dan, him and I went to so 3 out of the 4 of us, my future sister-in-law did not go to Trinity, but me and Dan and Dave Collins, we all went to the Trinity International University in Deerfield, Illinois. And fast forward 2 years from 1998, it's somewhere junior or sophomore year of college. And at Trinity, during that time when it was finals week, the cafeteria would be open, and they would just keep it open from like dinner all the way to like the wee hours of the night as a place to study, but also just a place to like get a snack, hang out, and kind of like there was different people. There was people studying, people talking, people playing games. And so on one of these nights, my friend Dan, he was off to a table by himself, obviously going through something, headphones, rocking back and forth, and it kind of took the eye of not just me and my group of friends who were friends with him, but kind of the whole cafeteria kind of started to see that something was going on there. So a small group of us went up to just kind of talk to him. It quickly started escalating. And when I mean escalating, I mean just him getting louder and just not understanding what was going on. So as more people are kind of just starting to watch, we decide to bring a small group of us out to the lobby of the cafeteria. And when I say small group, at this point it had grown to about 10 or 12 of us. And we're trying to talk to Dan, we're trying to calm him down, and we're giving him words of comfort. And by words of comfort, I mean we're looking to speak scriptural God truth into his life. Well, as we started doing that, he got more and more upset, more and more hostile, and actually even to a place where it was more than just confusing, but almost getting a little bit bizarre. And he started, if we came with Christian truth, he would mock it. And finally, this other guy, Dave, stood up and kind of like, just what you imagine in the Bible when you hear the word rebuke, like rebuked him, like in the name of Christ, you cannot say these things. And at which point, my friend Dan, the guy who was having this little episode, he grabbed the Bible, he opened up right to the part in the Gospels where Jesus is interacting with a demon-possessed man who calls himself Legion because he is filled with many demons. That right there was enough to kind of, make me do what I'm doing now and kind of give me goosies. I was really weirded out by the fact that he opened right up to that. And oh, by the way, it actually wasn't his Bible, it was just a Bible that was sitting there. So then he continues and he starts reading. And so if you've read this narrative in the Gospels, there's a conversation that's going on with Jesus and with this demon-possessed man. Every time he reads the demon-possessed man who calls himself Legion, his voice, he growls and is filled with visceral anger. When he reads Jesus' words, he's using a high-pitched voice and really just mocking Jesus. At which point, none of us, as sophomore and juniors in college, have any idea what to do. But we know enough that we figure we better pray. Well, we go to lay hands on him to pray, and that only makes the situation worse. And so by the end of all of this, everything just kind of like, he leaves, and we're just standing there. At which point, when you're in those sort of situations, at some point there's just nothing to do but like go home, and there's nothing more you can do. And so all of us go back to our dorms. I am not, at this point, I am beyond confused. I'm actually just downright scared. And so I crawl into my bed in my dorm, and I start singing an old hymn called How Firm a Foundation, because it just talks about how God and Jesus are this firm foundation. I'm scared out of my boots. I have no idea what just happened. And even talking with my friend later, he kind of blew it off, and I just straight up asked him, "Do you think you were possessed?" And he did his quintessential, sort of like charming laugh, where he's like, "No, man." And inconclusive. I walked away kind of being like, yeah, I'm not so sure. And so when we talk about the spiritual fight, maybe that's where you went in your head, right? I mean, 2 weeks ago, I wanted us to just look at, there's two things going on. You are imitating somebody. You are either imitating God or you are imitating Satan. And so last week we wanted to go, so who do we fight? And so there are stories of what we would call possession, where people are all of a sudden, they are not themselves, and they are not alone. We talk about resurrection power living on the inside and the Holy Spirit living in us. Well, it's true then that there can be the opposite of resurrection power living on the inside, and evil on the inside. And so the point that I want us to look at is that the invisible world is just as real as the visible world. That became painfully clear to me that night, and that night has obviously stuck with me. Now I think if we're being a little bit honest, we probably are kind of, maybe some of us maybe a little bit interested in that, right? Because, well, I mean, how evil is evil, and what's it really like? And, oh man, that sounds like somewhat of a cool story, and I want to be able to tell a cool story. So just on a macro level, it's not cool. You don't want anything to do with anything like possession. You just don't even want to. Which is why I tell people not to mess with Ouija boards or anything like that, because you don't want to start something, because once you start it, you don't want any piece of that. But for my friend, whether he was possessed or not, there was clearly something going on, and it wasn't like he was just walking on Trinity's campus and whoa, something kind of came over him. So there's these things in which evil comes in. And what I want to talk to you guys tonight is not so much about possession, but spiritual oppression. And the difference of that is, like I said, possession is where evil is inside of you. The oppression is where it is constantly fighting with you. It's something that it's in your mind, it's in your heart, it's kind of like always pushing, right? I mean, think about being in a crowd where you're in a crowd and you're separated from your friends, and you're just that's what spiritual oppression would be like. So we say, well, where do we fight when it comes to spiritual oppression? Well, we fight in our minds, we fight in our hearts, and then we fight in what the Bible calls a soul. And remember, the soul, just like I said, the invisible world is just as real as the visible world. Point to your soul. You can't. I had to struggle to find an image that kind of represented a soul. We can point to our brains, we can point to our hearts, but even that gets a little bit nebulous. You have to have some form of metaphorical and poetic understanding of the heart, because it's this part of you that drives what you love. And so when you think about the soul, and you think about all of this, Paul in the book of Ephesians uses the term inner man, your inner woman, that which guides you and defines you. Thank you. And so that's what I want to be focusing in and talking about oppression amongst that. So again, oppression is just going to be the air you breathe, because evil is always present. So evil, it is always there. I mean, just like God is always there, so is evil. And oppression is the presence of that. You can feel it in different ways and at different times, and it's different than oppression. So, biblical scholars, and this is just a helpful category for you to have, they talk about general revelation and then specific revelation. General revelation is the fact that Psalm 19, the skies above, they proclaim the glory of God. The skies talk, is what my wife Melissa says. She says, the clouds are speaking, and they speak about the glory of God. You look at a child, you look at your hand, and you just see that there is something amazing about this world. Specific revelation is different than general revelation, because specific revelation is when you're reading the text, when you're reading the Bible, and you see Christ. You see him for who he is. Now that's a special revelation that the Holy Spirit is creating inside of you. There's general grace, and there's specific grace. General grace is, we all woke up this morning. We have breath in our lungs. I mean, you have just, like everybody enjoys a good meal. That's general grace. It's for everybody. Specific grace is when you realize that when Jesus spoke the words, "It is finished," he was looking at you at your worst moments. That's specific grace, that you are truly forgiven. Likewise, there is a generic spiritual battle, and there is a specific spiritual battle. So that general one is something we all face. I don't know if you realize this, but you face the spiritual powers and oppression on a daily basis. That's something we all face. Specific, that's oppression. The specific one, that's going to be when evil and Satan and the devil resides inside of you. And so we're going to talk tonight primarily about oppression, but oppression is how, over long periods of time, it turns into letting evil in that possessive sense. So, two passages that get at what we're actually up against. You were dead in your trespasses and sins in which you previously lived, according to or because of the ruler of the power of the air. Satan's in charge. John, in his writing in 1 John, says, "We know that we are of God, and the whole world is under the sway, the control of the evil one." And your inner self is the battlefield. I got lots of slides, and just so you know, we're going to be moving quick, but like just kind of keep out of here. So your mind is what you believe to be true. Your heart is what you love, you treasure, you give your time to. You give your heart to things that you love. And your soul is what fills you and determines, your soul fills and determines your inner self. So mind, heart, and then soul. So what do you believe to be true? Well, this is where general oppression comes in, of the things that you and I believe. And so some of you might think, I can't do anything. That's a lie that places yourself below. But there's some of you who believe, I can do anything I set my mind to. And that becomes the other side of that coin, the pride of self. Some of you go, man, when it comes to life, I am getting an F-. I am not enough. Others of you have this lie that goes, I am enough. It's me, and I can do it, and I don't need anybody. Some of us think God doesn't really love you. Sure, he's contractually obligated to love you, but when it comes down to it, he doesn't really like you. And somewhere along the lines, this figures into your thinking when it comes to your parents. I'm a dad, and I get this all the time. You look handsome. You look beautiful. you're just saying that because you're my dad. You probably said that to your parents. If you want help believing that God really loves you, start realizing, I'm going to tell you from a parent's perspective, we actually like you. Now, there's some things that you do that really frustrate us, but it's a two-way street because there's some things that I do that really frustrate my kids. But we really, honestly love you. And so does God. So when we tell you you're handsome, when we tell you you're beautiful, don't dodge it, accept it. Some of you think no one really loves me. If they knew what was really going on inside of me, if they saw beyond my mask, they would hate me. Some of you think, you know what, God wouldn't forgive me for that. So what are the ways that oppression fill your heart? Well, number one, yourself. This egocentric self. That is kind of the first domino that sets everything into motion, like idolatry. Y'all worship something, every single one of us. You either worship Jesus or you worship something else. We all worship something. Bitterness, that's something that can fill our hearts. Envy, jealousy, I don't need to explain anything on that one. Judgment without knowledge, where you think you know somebody or you think you know more than you do, that's a way that the lies get in. Power, if you need to know how power can corrupt, watch The Hobbit or read the book. You and me are Thorin Oakenshield. We wish that we were Bilbo, we're more like Thorin. And then sex. Sex is one of those things, like we talked about last year in the Maid series. Like, sex is good. It's like God gave it to us. He gave it for us. It's an incredibly bonding and wonderful thing. But when it's given away or taken with this idea of self, this egocentricness, oh, it is a awful and destructive thing. And then your soul. You are either filled with evil or you're filled with God. Remember, Satan is your adversary. 2 weeks ago we said you are a fighter in a fight. Tonight I want to add in that Satan's schemes are relational things. And what I mean by that is they find their way in your relationships. If you need a litmus test, it's in your relationships. I want to introduce you to Michael Barrett. In 2006, Michael Barrett was the catcher for the Chicago Cubs. That's Michael Barrett punching A.J. Brzezinski for the White Sox in the jaw. That right there is a relational thing with a Satan scheme. And if you want a little bit more, here's Michael Barrett punching and getting into a fight with his own pitcher in the dugout on national television. Satan's schemes are indeed relational things. They come out amongst our relationships. So that's Michael Barrett and his messed upness. What about you? I'll have to go quick through these passages. But you got 2 Corinthians, and the 2 Corinthians, if you want to talk about Michael Barrett being a mess, this is a whole church being a mess. And what happened in 1 Corinthians is they had a guy who was sleeping with his father's wife. So that's stepson and stepmom. And Paul says, kick him out. They kick him out. He gets so convicted of his sin that he's crying. The Corinthian church is crying. And Paul says, comfort him. Forgive him and comfort him. Otherwise, he will be overwhelmed by excessive grief. When that happens, he says, we do not want anybody to be taken advantage of by Satan because we don't want to be ignorant of his schemes. So it's in relationships. This idea of forgiveness, comfort, not what you and I would have thought would elicit spiritual oppression leading to possession. Right? You would have thought, well, like, a bunch of my friends watched The Exorcist, and now, I mean, that's still not a wise idea, but comfort, forgiveness, The opposite of those things are Satan's schemes. Remember, Jesus said, a thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Now, Paul is giving, I'm going to go really quick through this. There's a lot of passages. Read Ephesians 4. You just got to read it even tonight. It says, the Gentiles, and by Gentiles that means those who aren't Christians. I mean, it meant it non-Jewish, but you can read it non-Christians. They are in the futility of their thoughts. That's the oppressed mind. They are ignorant. That's the oppressed mind. And they have hardness of hearts. They become callous in their souls. You can't break through. And he says, so God gave them up to all kinds of impurity with a desire for more and more. But that's not how the truth came in your life. He says, take off the old former self. Be renewed in your spirit and in your mind according to God's. So the other one, remember we looked back before and it said that we lived according to Satan, and now we're living according to God. And this leads to this passage here where Paul says, be angry. Like, you can be angry. For a long time I thought Christians could be anything but angry. You can be angry, but do not sin. Don't let the sun go down in your anger, and don't give the devil an opportunity. Satan's schemes are relational things. Your inner self is that battlefield, and what do you believe to be true? This is of vital importance. And here's what you need to believe to be true. It's not about you being not enough or enough. Christ is enough. Christ is enough for you. Period. The end. The name of Jesus. When we sang it, the power I will shout at the mention of your name. So what fills your heart? God is grace. Have faith in the Son of God who loves you and gave himself up for you. This is the gospel. This is what your mind, your heart, and your soul